evening, everyone. Welcome back to the Bullpen podcast. Hope everyone had a great Sunday. If you're tuning in after the Padres-Dodgers Sunday Night Baseball game, we welcome you to the Bullpen podcast. I am your host, Adam Kunos. You can follow me on Twitter at Kunos19. Also, don't forget to follow the podcast at the Bullpen Pod with 2 E's on Twitter. We are sponsored by Fanatics. Use the link tree in our Twitter bio to head over to Fanatics for all of your Major League Baseball gear, including jerseys, hats, t-shirts, sweatshirts, and more, and also your New Era caps for Armed Forces Day and Mother's Day, which has just dropped. So please use the link tree in our bio, head on over, and update your Major League Baseball collection. All right. We are joined by a very special guest tonight. We are joined by Nick Murawski of the Locked On White Sox podcast and the Good Guys Talk Back podcast as well. And we welcome Nick to the bullpen. Nick, how are you doing this evening?
Adam, doing great. Really appreciate you having me. Sox, hey, they had a big game on Sunday. They've won back-to-back series. They're still a bit of a difficult team to talk about, but hey, I love it. And let's get ready to talk some White Sox.
Absolutely. And again, you said the White Sox are a very interesting team. I'm going to go back to 2019 with this team when we thought we were coming to the end of the rebuild, and 2020 comes. We all know that crazy year. Will there be a season? Will there not be a season? We end up playing a 60-game sprint. The Sox do make the playoffs that year, go 3-0 to the Athletics the following year. We throw it back to Tony La Russa. A lot of backlash with that hire, but we do win the division for the first time since 2018. Unfortunately, we're bounced to the eventual American League Championship. I call them the Trash Toes, but the Astros for good measure. And then 2022 was just a complete disaster, in my opinion. So we got a lot to talk about. So, Nick, give us a little history on your take with the White Sox about your podcast.
I mean, a lifelong, multi-generational White Sox fan. Grew up, maybe a half hour from the ballpark in the southwest suburbs. My parents, diehard Sox fans, their parents. So I was born into it. I was a mass comm radio broadcasting major in college, and really didn't do much with that post-college, but really I just enjoy radio, always have. Some local heroes, Jonathan Brandmeier, Kevin Matthews, Steve Dahl. I mean, guys I just loved listening to. So about 5 years ago or so, really good friend of mine, lifelong friend, my friend Pat Hester, who's a huge White Sox fan as well. I said, bring him into the fold. Had started Good Guys Talk Back already, and just an outlet really to bring to Sox fans. I feel like they weren't getting enough attention for good reasons on some of our local radio stations, and just a very fan-centric experience, kind of a weekly kind of recap. And then last season, at the beginning of the last season, I jumped in for Locked On White Sox, which is a daily podcast, Monday through Friday. It's been, again, difficult to talk about this team last year regularly, this year now, but I love it. I mean, even during the off season, it's what I want to talk about. I just appreciate the history, just everything about this team. I have a lot of opinions of what needs to go on and to hopefully get this team in the right way. But, that's for down the road, I'm sure.
There you go. I'll give you a little history myself. I originally from the Chicago area myself. I grew up in Kane County, over in Elgin, St. Charles. I was about 45 miles away from the city, so I have some good memories going to, at the time, Comiskey. I still call it the Cell. I'm not a big fan of the guaranteed rate. I still call it the Cell or Comiskey, depending on my mood of the day. I've seen the White Sox down here in Florida. I've seen them at Wrigley, seen them at Comiskey. So it's nice being down here in Florida because you get a chance to experience warm weather. And luckily, got MLB TV, so I get to see the White Sox. Unfortunately, and this was kind of a blessing in disguise that it was blocked out when the White Sox and Rays were playing each other, because unfortunately, it was just a mauling. I did see one of those games live in person with my wife, who was a big Rays fan. So the car ride home was a happy Rays fan and a very depressed White Sox fan. But let's jump into it, Nick. Let's talk about the current 2023 White Sox. Give us your thoughts about just how bad April was. I mean, it was just a horrendous month, in my opinion. What's your thoughts?
Well, they were underprepared. poor fundamentals. We definitely had some injuries. Guys that we thought were maybe going to, get off on a hot start did not. Critical core guys. The bullpen, just an absolute disaster. Highest paid bullpen in all of baseball, and they put up some of the worst numbers. Inconsistent. Starters, it's typical at the beginning of the year to not go long into games, but that was very inconsistent too from our starters. Walking way too many batters, offensively not taking walks, horrible in hitting and with runners in scoring position, not hitting home runs. And Sox Park, guaranteed rate field, one of the more homer-friendly ballparks in all of baseball. So things that I thought were going to be different under Pedro Grifol. They were going to be a better prepared team. They were going to have the basic fundamentals that you practice and learn in high school. That wasn't going to be an issue. They were going to play with some intensity, some energy. I just didn't see that. And that's what really, I think was so frustrating as a White Sox fan is I thought April and May were urgent months for you in this ball club. Like you didn't want to see what happened last year where you dug yourself into a hole and it took so much energy to kind of somewhat claw back. And by the time you did go on a run, you just ran out of gas at the end. And it's such a weak division. No disrespect to, the other teams, but this is a winnable division for the White Sox on paper. Now, it's one thing to have a team on paper that you feel like can compete, but they have to actually go out and do it and produce results, and the results just were not there.
Yeah, I think you said it best when you say that the AL Central, no disrespect to the other 4 teams in the division, but this is a very weak division. If you rank the 6 divisions in baseball, the American League Central has to be at the basement of those 6. And when the White Sox won in 2021, they ran away with that division. I mean, they had the division locked up by at least June, and then once you got into July and August, it was just keeping the pace, and they locked it up at the beginning of September. And so you had Tony Russo, who's supposed to be kind of like a throwback. He was going to be able to communicate with the team. 2021, yes. 2022, no. You bring in Peter Grifol just to kind of reset the mood. Has something been not clicking in the clubhouse or something been missing?
Well, Pedro Grifol, first-time manager, which I thought was a surprising move when they made that move. A very well-respected guy, a great baseball resume, spent a lot of time with the Kansas City Royals organization in a variety of different roles. I believe it was Rick Hahn's hire, our GM, our White Sox GM. And it just felt like, maybe I could see this hire maybe in 2017, 2018, when the team didn't have high expectations. But I was looking for somebody that had some recent managerial experience and success to take this group of players that we still had and get them back on track. Everything I read, and I read a ton on this team daily, whether it's in the Athletic or the Chicago Trib or Sun Times or whatever Scott Merkin, the beat writer, is putting out, it seems like the chemistry's good. Like the vibes are good, and they're playing, they're positive vibes, and it's just Grifol keeps saying it's just an unfortunate rough stretch. Like you're gonna go through these funks, and it's just bad that it's happened at the beginning of the season, and so I back-to-back series now. Again, May an easier schedule than April, so take that for what it's worth. But every series right now is like a must-win series for the White Sox. They're 12-23, 7 games back in the Central. And the Minnesota Twins and the Cleveland Guardians, they're not going to put their lives on pause and say, well, let's wait for the Sox to start playing good. Let them catch up so we can have a fun, competitive summer. So, it's really really unfortunate the way it started off. And then you got the Eloy Jimenez, just unfortunate situation with the appendectomy on Saturday. He's going to be out for a little while. One of the hottest hitters that we had. They have to find a way. They absolutely have to find a way. Good to get TA back. Maybe Moncada's coming back soon. Amazing story with Liam Hendricks. That should add something to the energy. And you just got to keep fighting.
Yeah. Want to go back to the offseason real quick with you. obviously Jose Abreu signing with the Astros was just a big dagger for White Sox fans. He was kind of I would say, life of the White Sox since 2014. AL Rookie of the Year, AL MVP, just an all-star, just a tremendous hitter for that lineup. We signed Andrew Benintendi, who kind of fills in that outfield hole that we've been missing. He's been fairly decent in the outfield. I don't think he has brought that offensive power yet that we've seen him. I mean, he did have the walk-off hit against I believe, the Twins in extra innings. So he is bringing some life to that lineup. But is there still a piece of this lineup that's missing? Yeah, Tim Anderson's back. McCann should be back in a few days, hopefully. But is there another piece that we could add to this lineup just to make it a more solid lineup?
I mean, right now it would be a Yohan Moncada that was hitting the way he was at the beginning of the season. That we were finally seeing maybe a comfortable Yohan Moncada, hitting for power. That was a shame to lose him when we did, and I think that's the only really addition you can think of right now is just keeping some of these guys all together healthy for a long period of time. The off season was another disappointment. And you kind of knew it as a Sox fan following this team. It's like, they're not going to spend big. They're not going to go after top tier pitching. They're not going to go, in the big buckets for talent. And again, hey, Benintendi checks a box, but the bar was so low for the White Sox as corner outfielders. We had Vaughn and Gavin Sheets in the outfield last year. They're first base DH. So it was great to finally get an actual left fielder that's got a Gold Glove, that's got some experience with Pedro Grifol during his time with Kansas City, lefty bat. I was looking for a little bit more power, but I mean, he's not going to maybe 15 home runs in a season. So he does have time for that. I like that he gets on base. Obviously he's going to catch a lot of grief as the $75 million man, the most expensive guy in the Sox history. And, you're just going to get some, a little bit of a uptick in the batting average. But I don't know, he keeps the line moving right now. And he plays with some consistency. And I like his glove out in left field. But the off season, they could have done so much more. It comes down to sometimes, well, how are you spending the money? If whatever allowance that Hahn gets and Kenny Williams, and well, how are you spending it? Because you got to live on depth. And the Sox have to win on the margins. And when you're looking at, hey, you're going to have injuries, you're going to have to say next man up. Well, those next men are valuable. So what kind of talent are you bringing in with your limited financial resources? And, I haven't seen that over the last few years. I feel like the Sox have been striking out on that.
Yeah, you mentioned that free agency. I mean, I was hoping for a little more in the free agent splash this offseason. But again, yeah, Sox fans were used to disappointment in the offseason. I mean, I had to go back to maybe 2005 where we had, I think, one of the best off seasons. We bring in Jose Contreras in 2004 in a trade. We bring in El Duque to kind of round out that pitching staff. You have Taihiro Iguchi, who was a no-name from Japan, who came over, who had instant impact. Carl Everett came in as a DH. It's just something that we have not seen in this team for a long time. I'm hoping maybe that this year kind of just wakes up the front office and go. I want to ask you about Oscar Colas, who came up with the Sox, who was on the opening day roster, kind of struggled. He did have the walk-off hit on Jackie Robinson Day, which was just a fantastic thing for him. Got sent back down to AAA. Do you think it was a mistake to bring him up opening day, or should we have waited to maybe a month or two in the season?
Well, the reason why he had to start in right field on opening day is because that is the situation the White Sox front office put themselves in. They didn't make an aggressive move to get a proven veteran right fielder in, so they hyped up or fanned the flames of Oscar Colas. He did not spend a lot of time at AAA last year. I mean, his numbers just aren't there. And depending on who you talk to, some people would have told you he absolutely needs to get some time in Charlotte before he plays at the big league level. I wasn't blown away with his defense, but again, the bar was low. As long as you're somewhat serviceable out there in right field, you know what you're doing, you'll figure it out. Now, the bat we know was going to have learning curve. Like, he was going to be a player that was going to scuffle and figure out major league pitching. They all do. It's happened to every single player. Very few come up and just start hitting. They're the few of the few. So my issue was, you knew that was going to happen to Oscar Colas. So why not just start him, in AAA and go with Gavin Sheets, I guess, in right. Let him get into a groove, get some confidence, get his swing going, and then bring him up maybe in May. Now, Colas had a pretty good spring. Okay. And that might have been the way the White Sox front office looked at it. It's like, well, this works out for us. He had a pretty good spring. No one's going to yell at us for bringing him up and starting in Houston on opening day. The fact that you decided to kind of bail after 1 month and some of the quotes that came out about it and why they were doing it. And it didn't sit well with me. Now I'm sure we'll see him again but buy the ticket, take the ride. You signed up for this, so let him ride it out. Now, the problem is Colas was supposed to be hiding in that lineup. You weren't supposed to notice him scuffling offensively because Moncada, Jimenez, Robert, TA, they were all going to be beasts. They were going to be producing. So guys like Colas could kind of hide. We're not counting on him to carry the team offensively, but when nobody's hitting, you look at a guy like Colas and you're like, well, I guess, yeah, we'll send you down. It just didn't sit well with me.
Yeah. I want to go to something that I think you sent out on a tweet earlier. I think you brought up the 2019 Nationals as we've seen this happen before. And I'm going to bring up the 2005 Astros, who were 15 and 30, famously came back to win the NL wild card, run their way to the World Series before meeting the White Sox. Can you see a similar situation where the White Sox take a Nationals type run to a World Series or to at least maybe a playoff berth?
Yeah, I'll have to. Yeah, well, that was part of Bob Nightingale's article in the USA Today. There's a couple teams. There's several actually that are kind of performing under the level they wanted to perform here at the beginning of 2023. And the Cardinals, of course, Yankees, but the White Sox, scuffling. Unfortunately, and using the Nationals and maybe even Braves a couple of years ago as a reference of, hey, underperforming teams can turn it around and you never know what can happen. Now, I'll have to look at the 2019 Nationals of what kind of injuries they went through and what kind of roster construction, how consistent things were, if they overcame stuff like that as well. Could it happen? It can happen, in this division, especially with the Sox playing a lot of their AL Central opponents still. But you have to play a different brand of baseball. You can't just say, well, if we keep showing up and we keep, having faith and being positive, that's all good. But you need to clean a lot of things up. The White Sox need to completely figure out how to execute with runners in scoring position consistently. This bullpen has got to turn things around. They got to get more out of their starting staff. And obviously health is a major part of it. And getting performance out of their core. Luis Robert went through a really rough stretch. It looks like he might have figured some things out as of late. And guys have to pick up the slack with Eloy Jimenez, being out. So it's possible. Anything's possible, but there just has to be a different brand of baseball being played for the Sox.
Yeah, and you kind of beat me to a segue. Let's talk about this White Sox bullpen that was supposed to be the best of the best in Major League Baseball. I mean, I looked through some of their bullpen arms. They got Aaron Bummer, Alex Comey, Kendall Graveman, Joe Kelly, Lambert, Lopez, Middleton, Santos. Obviously, Liam Hendricks is making his way back after just beating cancer, probably the feel-good story for Major League Baseball this year. Why is it that this bullpen has not been able to figure it out yet?
I think a lot of it initially, and it may still be happening, is Pedro Grifol didn't know what he had and how to necessarily use them in certain positions. When you decide to go with a closer by committee, which they decided to do, obviously with Liam Hendricks out and recovering, well, that really lends yourself to a lot of interesting, confusing, moments of, well, are you going with matchups? Are you going lefty righty? Are you then having to figure out, well, he just pitched, yesterday. I don't know if we can go with him like that. That doesn't necessarily happen with your just proven closer. Sure, sometimes you're not going to pitch in multiple games in a row, depending on, how many pitches you threw in the previous outing. But to not have your named closer, well, a lot of things are, in flux. A lot of things are fluid. And, guys just weren't performing as well. They had to, they got rid of Jose Ruiz early in the season. And then our lone trade deadline acquisition from last year, Jake Diekman, who has been absolutely awful. And we were on the hook for him financially. They got rid of that. Thank you. I mean, the Sox were actually performing as a serious organization by just kicking him to the curb. But Aaron Bummer, he has been a guy that a lot of people have talked about in previous seasons of, soft contact and it's like bad luck. And, but I haven't seen that from Aaron Bummer. He's just flat out bad right now through April. There's been some good as of late, like Middleton and Santos. Guys have kind of come into their own a little bit. Middleton has had a nice stretch of the last 3 games. Santos can run it up 102, 103, but needs to think about control. It's one thing to throw a fireball, but if you're walking people, Lopez is confusing to me because I thought he had it like early in the season, very early. He looked like a man on a mission. Like, this is going to be our guy. We're going to want to go to the 9th inning. He's got 100 plus. He's not just throwing straight fastballs. He was mixing it up. He was becoming more of a pitcher, not a thrower. But I'm iffy on him right now. I just don't think you can trust him in certain situations. So Griffol's playing the cards he's been dealt. And, it was a really bad April. I'm hoping guys like Kendall Graveman, Joe Kelly stay healthy and produce, and guys like Middleton and Santos, newer names, are really all that they're cracked up to be.
Yeah, and it kind of reminds me back in 21 when the White Sox brought in Craig Kimbrell to kind of fill in as the 8th inning guy. It was a little confusing on why they brought him in when he's a proven closer and you're bringing him in and you have back. That was a weird situation to begin with. I mean, it did have some success, but it was still just a hit or miss. I think he's more of a National League closer anyway rather than American League, but that's just my opinion. So when Hendricks gets back, what are you going to kind of expect of him that first game back in the White Sox uniform?
I mean, it's going to be pretty electric. I would say his first home game, he's thrown a couple games right now in AAA Charlotte. I think they wanted 4 to 5 appearances out of him in the minors before, assessing the situation and maybe thinking about a call up. The energy that he can bring, I mean, he's brought so much to the ball club to begin with when he signed on, and he's just a different force. He is cut from a different cloth, and I think I don't want to say like we're going to use him as a rallying guy. Like, it shouldn't be all on his shoulders. He's just an amazing story, and he's an amazing guy. And I hope his presence just changes things, and maybe guys fall in line a little differently out of that bullpen now that he's back. But gosh, I mean, his first appearance, I would say on the South Side, hopefully that's a packed house, or at least 25,000. We don't get packed houses very often, but
no, absolutely not.
Good sizable crowd, and I think he will bring an energy, and who knows, it could be a spark for this team.
All I hope he's mic'd up. Every time he's mic'd up on the mound, I love it. Yeah. It's just a good thing. So let's talk. I mean, this has been the big issue. White Sox fans, ownership, and front office. I mean, you've seen the signs on Twitter. Jared, sell the team. I think they were chanting that at a couple of the games back in April. Is it time for Reinsdorf to be? Is it time for an owner changeup? I mean, Reinsdorf has teams since 81. And in that time, and I'm going to pull up the stats to make sure I got it correct, 6 division titles, 1 wild card berth, a pennant, and a World Series. Had about 20 winning seasons in there, but not the success I would like to see from an ownership. I mean, he's more known for the Bulls of the 90s, and he's still raking in cash off Michael Jordan in the 90s. Is it time for an ownership change?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, if you ask me as a lifelong Sox fan, it's just how that works and what's the thing that finally pushes him over the edge. I don't know. And the reason is because nothing will seriously change unless there is an ownership change. Like, he will continue to keep Kenny Williams and Rick Hahn where they are, and a lot of the other cogs in the inside machine. You look at the Griffol hire, and it was the first time they went out of the organization in like 25 years to bring in a manager. I mean, that can't happen. You need to be bringing in the smartest, the absolute best from around baseball to challenge your way of thinking, to be doing things the correct way. And I don't think Jerry wants anything to do with that. He wants people that he is, knows for years and years that will do what he wants done, and just kind of keep kicking the can down the road, and kind of spending little here and there. The fact that we haven't signed a guy for a 9-figure deal, one of the few teams in all of baseball, is ridiculous as a Chicago team. I mean, give me a break. Like, yeah, sure, they somewhat made an offer, got serious on Manny Machado, but they didn't play Manny Machado's game. Jerry played his own game and wanted to sweeten it with incentives. But we knew what the game is from the beginning. It's like going out and getting the talent, figuring out, hey, if we get Bryce Harper and we just figure this out and we sign him, we've locked up our left field and our right field and our left-handed power hitter for years. That stuff still irks me, that when it came time to kind of finish up this rebuild and put a capstone in, it was not done correctly. And it's really time, because without that change, nothing else will change within the system. And there's organizational rot right now, and there needs to be a clean house.
Yeah, I think you said it best I think back to when Manny Machado, Bryce Harper, all these big free agents were available. The Sox made like a little bit of a splash on it, but never really like went all in serious witness, in my opinion. I'm not going to play the what if game, because I hear this from Padres fans after we traded Tatis Jr. for, I can't remember who, but I know it was like one of the worst trades. And everyone's saying like, well, Tatis is
James Shields.
James Shields. That was like maybe 8 years ago. I'm not worried about that, because we did not know what Tatis Jr. was going to be. Granted, he is a absolute beast at the plate. Good. I think he's trying to be a pretty decent left fielder, outfield player. If there is an ownership change, and I say this with a big if, because I don't know if that will happen within the next maybe 5-10 years. I think Jerry is kind of too divested into this team. He has bloomed the White Sox into a good value. The merchandise sells. They got a lot of passionate White Sox fans who love to come to the park. It's just knowing that there's not the talent on the field, I think it's going to be a struggle to draw in the crowd day after day. You have the Cubs, when they were horrible, were still selling out Wrigley Field day after day. And now you got an ownership who has put money into not only the ballpark, but the team. And that's something I kind of want to see. We were chatting before we went live about how the Rays have just poured money into their organization, have found ways to win in different ways. And that's something as a Sox fan I want to see, and it's kind of frustrating.
Yeah, and that's where I was hoping the Sox would go eventually, is bring in, some smart people from organizations that have had success, and they're using the most cutting edge ways of how to do stuff. The Sox just seem like they're way behind the times. They don't want to change and evolve, and nobody is forcing them to do that. That's the other thing, is why is Rick Hahn still a general manager? Because maybe the expectations of Jerry Reinsdorf are that low, and he doesn't expect much from the White Sox. He's making money. It's growing. It's a business. He doesn't care that much. So it's like, as long as you do my bidding, you don't ask for any more money, and you kind of pretend to put a competitive team out that gets fans somewhat excited throughout the summer, that's fine. I'm going to keep you in place. I don't think Jerry Reinsdorf has serious expectations, so that's another thing that just irritates me about this perpetual just mediocrity.
Yeah, and a lot of people are saying we're going to kind of wrap the segment up here shortly. We're going back to the offseason about who's going to be the manager. A lot of people are saying bring Ozzie Guillen back. As much as I would love to see Guillen back, I don't think he would be the right fit for this team at this time. What he did from his time in 04 to 2011 was just absolutely fantastic. I think he had a good hand on the team. It is a different game now. There's a lot more metrics in going into managing game. You have a lot more pieces in the play. I just don't think that Ozzie would have been a good fit. No disrespect to Ozzie. Just a great manager overall.
It had to be someone from outside the organization. I think if they would have gone that route, it would have been the kind of the same thing, the same drama. I will say though, to Ozzy's credit, like it would have been far more exciting right now with them going 12-23. His post games would be epic. I mean, they would be must watch, which they kind of are on NBC Sports Chicago. But I love Ozzy. I mean, I wish one day they will retire his number 13. Nobody has worn it since he left the organization as manager. For what he did as a player and a manager, give him that moment for all time. But since Ventura was hired way back when, anytime the team scuffles, there'll always be maybe we should bring Ozzy in. Maybe we should bring in Ozzy. Maybe it's time for Ozzy to come back. And that's because he is still so part of the White Sox world. He does the pre and post. He's doing radio interviews. It's like, so he's there. He's visible. He's an option. If he goes away one day, I think then we'll lose that. Oh, well, maybe Ozzy should come back because we don't see him regularly. He's not involved in this team on a regular basis. I thought like, he seemed like he had a shot. It seemed like they brought him in, but I think they just had to go outside of the organization. I just wish they would have went outside with somebody that had some prior managerial experience, from a successful organization.
Yeah, and before we kind of wrap up the segment, get into the series preview, give me your thoughts. Do you see a light at the end of the tunnel for this season? Is there some sort of hope? Because I remember you talked about that a couple episodes ago about you brought in Sox fans to ask questions, and they were not shy on some of the questions. I remember listening to the episode. They were not shy about what they thought about this team. I even chimed in saying, I'm still holding out hope. I'm still crossing my fingers, crossing my teeth, dotting my eyes, everything I can do. Should I still be holding out hope?
Well, I would hold hope right now. I mean, again, because of the division we're in, and let's see how this team performs in May. Like they really have to almost flip-flop their April record. I mean, they were 8-21 in April, and they almost have to flip-flop, in May and see how, if health can stick around for this team. But I am kind of tired of just always relying on warm weather and health and this, that, and the other. They just need to be a better team. But that's my worry. I don't know if they can. We might be asking them to do something that they just might not be able to do. So I have to have hope doing a daily podcast and just as a lifelong suffering Sox fan, I want to feel hope, especially throughout the summer, come September that, the Sox can win this division. They should be able to in 2023. But realistically, I think May is a critical month for this team.
I agree too. So we shall see what this month holds for the White Sox. So at the end of every show, Nick, my wife and I have a competition that we have been doing for a while. We do a weekly series pick, and I was one series shy. However, the Padres were the kicker that puts my wife back up 2 series on me for this week, and I go through a streak. I'm making a comeback, but we're going to look at a couple series, and we're going to start, obviously, with the White Sox at Royals. In 2020, we had the Royals number. We only lost to them once in that crazy 60-game season, but it seems now that the Royals have had our number over the last season. We're going back to Grove's old stopping grounds. What are your thoughts on this series?
Well, Kansas City is a very tough place to play for the White Sox. I think they were 4-6 in Kansas City last season. I mean, we were under 500 against the Royals all of last year, 9-10. Hey, Pedro Grifol should have the secret weapon. He should know how to prepare this team for the Kansas City Royals. And I think he's got a chip on his shoulder heading into Kansas City. It's like, you passed up on me twice during managerial searches. Okay. I've now landed a managerial job and we're coming into your building and I am going to beat you. It's a 4-game series. I mean, sweeping the Royals, like you just can't realistically think that, but the Sox have to go 3 or 4. I think they will. I honestly do. I like their pitching matchups. I think this was a good game to go off of. There's no off day. You ride this offense, hopefully into the next series. I don't think they're going to score 17 runs or anything like that in game one of the Royals series, but ride some of that energy and Griffol's edge that he has going in. Again, how much can he really do as manager? Hopefully preparation. Hopefully he has these guys prepared and they take care of the Royals. I would say 3 out of 4.
There you go. I like that too. I mean, you got Dylan Cease going for game 1, Lucas Giolito in game 2. They've yet to announce game 3 and 4 starters. The Royals are matching up Greinke, Lyles, Keller, and Singer. All of them have 4.5 plus ERAs. So, I mean, the pitching for Royals is going to be a big question mark, in my opinion. I mean, Zach Greinke with the 60-mile-an-hour fastball ball that just floats down the middle of the plate is hard to judge. But you're kind of on the same page as my wife and I. We're both going for the White Sox in this series. I agree. 3 out of 4 should be suffice. I would love to see a sweep. I mean, that's kind of my hopeful thinking, but we shall see. The last series we're going to talk about, another AL Central matchup, and I can't believe we're looking up at the Detroit Tigers and the Cleveland Guardians in the standing. Give me your thoughts on these teams and their matchup.
Yeah, I didn't think Detroit, I didn't think we were going to have such a bad start to the year. And the vibe I got out of Detroit and Kansas City was, don't even look at us this year. Like, we are not going to be seriously competing. And so maybe Detroit's playing kind of with house money right now. I think Cleveland fans are wondering what happened. We didn't really change our team much. We kind of added. And what's going on with the start of this? Like, how come we're not at the top, of the Central? So, I never go against a team like doesn't have anything really to play with, and they're looking to just spoil people. So, I like Detroit, and I want to see Detroit win in this series. So, both for that.
I'm right there with you. I picked the Tigers myself. My wife's going with the Guardians. So again, we will see how that series goes in our favorites of next week episode. Nick, I want to thank you very much for coming onto the podcast tonight. It was amazing having you on. It was great to talk White Sox baseball. I mean, it's hard to talk White Sox baseball in the city of Florida when you're surrounded by Yankee fans and Rays fans, Marlins fans, and just teams from out of the state. Again, my special thanks to Nick Murawski of the Lockdown White Sox podcast. You can catch his podcast daily on YouTube and Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcast. Also, make sure you follow his other podcast, Good Guys Talk Back. You guys do weekly shows on Sunday, correct?
We do, yeah. And we've got a YouTube channel. If you want to tune in live, that's great. But the audio is available absolutely everywhere.
Awesome. Well, again, Nick, thank you very much for joining us. This episode will be on your local podcast streaming devices tomorrow around midday. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us here on the Bullpen Podcast. For myself and Nick, we hope you guys have a wonderful night. Have a good night.